The biggest lie in personal finance is not that money matters. Of course, money matters. The biggest lie is that wealth grows in a straight line, that if you save 10% of the way to $1 million, you are 10% of the way to freedom, and that if progress feels slow, the strategy must be broken. That lie has buried more futures than any bear market I have ever seen. I have watched people work hard, save faithfully, do the unpleasant part for years, and then abandon the process just before the engine was ready to pull its full weight. They quit because the early years insult the ego you contribute. You wait, you behave, you stay rational, and nothing in your emotional life tells you that anything important is happening. That is where most people lose. They do not lose because the math failed. They lose because they cannot survive the silent phase. If you want me to put this brutally, here it is. Most people are not too poor to build wealth. They are too addicted to visible reward to stay in the room long enough for compounding to become dangerous in their favor. I learned a long time ago that money has two jobs. The first job is obvious. It pays bills. The second job is the one that changes your life. It buys back your future by building an engine that can work while you sleep, work while you worry, work while you are sick, and eventually work hard enough to reduce the amount of life you have to sell. The average person never builds the second machine. They keep all their financial energy trapped in labor. They wake up, trade time for income, spend most of it, save what is left, and judge progress by what they personally contributed. That is the linear lie. It is the belief that your future will always be pulled mostly by your own effort. That is not wealth. That is survival with a spreadsheet. Real wealth begins the day your money stops behaving like stored effort and starts behaving like hired labor. That transformation does not happen everywhere. It happens at thresholds. It happens when the engine reaches enough size that its own output begins feeding the next cycle with real force. The source you gave me names 3 of those thresholds, and the numbers matter because they show how the psychology changes when the machine stops being theoretical and starts becoming undeniable. The first is around $100,000. The second is around $650,000. The third is $1 million. Now let me tell you what those numbers really mean. 100,000 is not 10% of the way to becoming rich. 100,000 is the point where the engine is finally warm. That is a completely different thing. Most people think in percentages of destination. I think in changes of mechanism. If a machine has not turned on yet, you are laying pipe, pouring concrete, installing the motor, wiring the control panel, and testing the pressure. In those years, the process feels humiliatingly slow because most of the visible result still comes from you. That is exactly what your source shows. With $500 invested every month at roughly 7% annual returns, it can take about 7 years and 9 months to reach the first 100,000. During that early stretch, your own contributions do most of the visible lifting, while the return engine is only beginning to wake up. That is the zone where impatience kills people. They look at the account and think, I have done all this work, and this is all I have to show for it. Wrong question. The right question is, have I built enough pressure for the machine to finally assist me? Because once you cross that first threshold, the process stops feeling like manual labor and starts feeling like assisted motion. Your source makes the point clearly. The next jump, from 100,000 to 200,000, does not take another nearly 8 years. It takes closer to 5. That is the same person, the same 500 a month, the same approximate return, but a completely different experience because the engine is no longer cold. This is why the first 100,000 is so important. Not because it is glamorous, not because it makes you free, not because anyone will notice. It matters because it is the first proof that the machine will eventually work harder than your feelings. I want you to understand how rare that psychological crossing really is. In a culture trained by instant entertainment, instant validation, and instant outrage, the act of contributing month after month into something that does not flatter you for years is practically an act of rebellion. Your neighbors can see a new SUV. They can see a remodeled kitchen. They can see a weekend trip. They cannot see a slowly warming compound engine, so they respect the consumption and ignore the system. Then 20 years later, they wonder why the quiet person has options. That question has an answer. The quiet person survived the silent phase, and the silent phase is where serious people are made. When I was young, I did not become interested in compounding because it was exciting. I became interested in it because it was rational. Rational systems are very often boring at the beginning. humiliating in the middle, and extraordinary at the end. The crowd wants the order reversed. The crowd wants extraordinary first. That is why the crowd stays broke longer than it has any right to. You do not need brilliance to get through the early stage. You need what I call friction tolerance. Friction tolerance is the ability to endure a process that is correct before it becomes emotionally rewarding. It is the ability to keep buying, keep waiting, keep ignoring noise, and keep refusing to treat slow visible progress as failure. Without friction tolerance, you will sabotage yourself every time the market gets noisy or the timeline feels insulting. This is where a lot of people say something foolish. They say the early years prove that investing is too slow. No, the early years prove that you are still the main engine. That is different. At the beginning, your job is not to feel rich. Your job is to feed the machine. Your contributions are not the final performance. They are the fuel. And fuel always looks unimpressive until combustion begins. Once the engine gets larger, the emotional experience changes. That is what the second threshold is about. Your source puts the next major psychological shift around $650,000 in productive assets. At that size, investment income starts looking less like a nice side effect and more like a second paycheck. The source frames it in terms of an 8% return producing roughly $52,000 a year, which does not fully replace the median household income, but changes the entire feeling of financial vulnerability. That is the point I care about. Not the bragging rights, not the round number, the change in fear. Because fear is the hidden tax that controls most people long before taxes ever do. When you have no engine, every threat is existential. A difficult boss can wreck your month. A layoff can wreck your year. A medical event can wreck your confidence. A recession can make you feel personally hunted. Everything is close to the bone because labor is doing almost all the carrying. But when your assets begin generating meaningful cash flow, something else appears. Refusal power. Refusal power is one of the most valuable financial assets in the world, and most people never build enough of it to even recognize it when they see it. Refusal power means you can say no without trembling. No to the job that is poisoning your mind. No to the manager who thinks your mortgage makes you obedient. No to the deal that smells wrong. No to the panic sale everyone else is making because they are overleveraged and underprepared. No to the fake opportunity that demands instant action and punishes thought. At around $650,000, the engine has not fully replaced labor for most households, but it has done something almost as important. It has started reducing desperation, and when desperation shrinks, intelligence improves. That matters more than people think. A desperate person cannot allocate capital well because every decision is contaminated by urgency. They take bad jobs because the rent is due. They sell good assets because the headlines are loud. They overreact to volatility because their margin for error is tiny. They think they are making investment decisions, but really they are managing fear. An engine widens the interval between stimulus and reaction. That interval is where good judgment lives. Your source hints at this when it says that at this level, losing a job becomes an inconvenience rather than a catastrophe, and that people can suddenly contemplate starting a business, going back to school, learning a new skill, or traveling while they are still young enough to enjoy it. That is not merely a lifestyle upgrade. That is a structural shift in the economics of your own life. This is the point where many people finally misunderstand wealth in a new way. They think the goal was always passive income. Passive income is not the deepest prize. Choice is, the real victory is not that the machine pays you. The real victory is that the machine changes what you will tolerate. It is one thing to earn money. It is another thing to become harder to coerce. That is why the second threshold is so psychologically powerful. The first threshold proves the machine works. The second threshold proves the machine can protect you. And then we reach the third threshold, $1 million. Let me be very clear. $1 million is no longer the fairy tale number it once was. Inflation has taken a real bite out of the symbolism. $1 million is not what it used to be, and pretending otherwise is childish. Your source admits that the number may feel like what $500,000 once represented. That is fair. But dismissing $1 million, because it is not what it used to be, is just another form of financial stupidity. $1 million still matters. It matters because at that size, The compound engine has become culturally undeniable, psychologically irreversible, and mathematically dangerous in your favor. If you keep your discipline, the source describes that milestone as a deep emotional unlock, a point where a regular salaried person suddenly realizes the system actually works if they stick with it long enough. That is exactly right. At 1 million, the game stops feeling like hope and starts feeling like leverage. Here is the part ordinary people miss. 1 million is not the end of compounding. It is the end of needing faith. Discipline requires belief. After that, discipline requires self-control. Those are two different battles. Before 1 million, you are fighting doubt. You wonder if this is worth it, if the market will betray you, if the sacrifice is excessive, if everyone else is somehow smarter, faster, luckier, or more connected than you. After 1 million, the math is obvious enough that the main danger is no longer doubt. The main danger is ego. Now the temptations change. You start thinking you are special. You start confusing a favorable system with personal genius. You start believing that because the engine got you here, you can now abuse it, interrupt it, or replace patience with entertainment. That is how people stall after 7 figures. Your source says some people hit that number, get comfortable, and coast. That is exactly the validation trap. They wanted proof more than they wanted freedom. Once the proof arrives, they relax the discipline that made the proof possible. Do not make that mistake. The day you hit 1 million, you are not being told to celebrate your intelligence. You are being warned to protect your process. Because the mathematics beyond that point become increasingly absurd if you continue to behave. The source explains it well. From 1 to 1.5 million only requires 50% more. From 2 to 3 million, the climb is proportionally smaller than the climb that got you from 0 to 100,000. Each later jump can happen faster than your intuition expects because the machine is carrying more and more of its own weight. This is why wealthy people eventually start seeing spending differently. To a person without an engine, a $200 dinner is a treat. To a person with an engine, it is also a future stream of possible output. I am not telling you never to enjoy your money. I am telling you to stop pretending that spending has only one cost. Every dollar has a present use and a future use. The poor and the middle class often see only the present use. Wealthy people see both. That is not because wealthy people hate enjoyment. It is because they can see the engine behind the money. If you can only see the bill, you will spend differently than if you can also see the forfeited compounding. That vision is a competitive advantage. I call it seeing the second life of money. Money has a first life when you earn it. Money has a second life when you allocate it. People who stay ordinary honor the first life and murder the second. People who become free protect the second life with almost religious seriousness. Now, I want to repair one weakness in the original material because this is where audiences often get lazy. When someone hears these milestones, they start thinking the numbers themselves are magical. They are not. There is nothing sacred about 100,000 as a number. There is nothing mystical about 650,000. 1 million is not a spiritual event. These milestones matter because of the relationship between capital size and return rate. The principle is what matters. The principle is that compounding changes character once the return stream becomes large enough relative to your labor contribution and living costs. That can happen sooner if you contribute more, invest longer, and avoid self-destruction. It can happen later if you interrupt the process, chase nonsense, or keep resetting the machine with lifestyle inflation. The thresholds are examples of mechanism shift, not lucky lottery tickets. And that leads me to the real enemy in this entire story. It is not low income. It is not bad luck. It is not even market volatility. It is interruption. Interruption is the great wealth killer. People stop contributions because the market falls. They cash out because they are scared. They upgrade their life every time their salary rises. They start over at zero with every new obsession. They interrupt the engine so often that they never let it become more powerful than their own labor. Then they conclude that compounding is overrated. No, their consistency was overrated. If you want the machine to become stronger than your paycheck, you have to stop behaving like a saboteur. Your source makes a critical point about crashes that I want to sharpen. If you are investing consistently over long stretches, market downturns are not a violation of the plan. They are part of the feed cycle. Lower prices mean the same contribution buys more of the productive asset, and the eventual recovery makes those accumulated shares more valuable. The crash feels like danger only if you think like a spectator instead of an accumulator. That is one of the most important distinctions in finance. Are you watching the market or feeding the engine? Those are different identities. Spectators love headlines. Engine builders love process. Spectators want explanation. Engine builders want accumulation. Spectators check prices for emotional stimulation. Engine builders check behavior. If you are still in the contribution years, your biggest edge is not genius. It is the ability to remain an accumulator while everyone around you becomes a spectator. That sounds simple. It is not. Because modern life is built to make you feel behind. Every app, every ad machine on your phone is designed to make patients feel like failure. You are shown someone else's car, someone else's vacation, someone else's business launch, someone else's hot stock, someone else's crypto luck, someone else's fake urgency. All of it pushes you toward emotional spending or impulsive speculation, because both behaviors keep you from ever building enough capital to escape dependence. The system is very comfortable with you being productive. It is less comfortable with you becoming independent. An employee with no engine is easy to manage. He needs the check, he fears the gap, he accepts nonsense, he mistakes predictability for safety because he has no private source of resilience. A person with a real engine is harder to govern. That person can wait. That person can walk away. That person can survive bad timing without bad decisions. That person can choose silence over noise. And that is why I have always cared more about ownership than appearance. Appearance is a costume. Ownership is infrastructure. When you own productive assets long enough, you are not just changing your balance sheet. You are changing the bargaining position of your life. This is where I want to push you harder. Do not tell me you want freedom if you refuse to build the engine that makes freedom possible. Do not tell me you admire wealthy people if you still spend like applause is an asset class. Do not tell me the process is too slow when the alternative is to spend 40 years fully dependent on labor and call that normal. The source uses a modest example of $500 a month. That matters because it strips away the fantasy that the system only works for trust fund children or high-paid speculators. With reasonable returns and consistency, even that level of contribution can eventually create thresholds where the machine changes your relationship with work, risk, and time. Time was going to pass anyway. That is one of the cruelest and most liberating truths in finance. The next 7 years will pass whether you build the first threshold or not. The next 20 years will pass whether you feed the engine or finance a lifestyle. The next 30 years will pass whether your future is carried by assets or chained to continued labor. Most people act as if delaying the process somehow delays aging. It does not. Delay only means you arrive later to the same truth. And the truth is simple. If you do not build an engine, you will remain the engine. That can work for a while when you are young, healthy, employable, and still able to confuse stamina with security. But there comes a day when the body slows, the market changes, the employer restructures, the energy dips, the family needs more from you, and suddenly labor does not feel like an infinite resource anymore. If you built no engine, that moment is terror. If you built one, that moment is management. That is the real divide. Not rich versus poor, engine versus no engine. Now let me translate the 3 milestones one final time, so you do not leave here remembering only the round numbers. 100,000 means the machine has finally warmed enough to assist you. 650,000 means the machine can materially reduce your fear and increase your refusal power. 1 million means the machine is now strong enough that discipline matters more than belief. And if you stay rational, later wealth can arrive with a speed that would have looked impossible during the silent phase. Those are not trophies. They are phases of mechanization. They mark the stages at which your life stops being powered only by effort and starts being powered by accumulated capital. And if that sentence does not move you, then you still think money is for spending. I do not. I think money is stored choice. I think money is compressed time. I think money, when kept inside a productive system, becomes a private labor force that can defend your dignity. That is why I have never been impressed by fast money, loud money, or status money. I am impressed by quiet engines. I am impressed by people who can endure the invisible years without needing applause. I am impressed by those who can keep buying when nothing feels dramatic. Keep holding when the crowd loses its nerve, and keep protecting the second life of money while everyone else murders theirs for temporary comfort. That is where freedom comes from. Not luck, not charisma, not timing every market turn process, structure compounding, and a temperament strong enough to survive the boredom between the decision and the payoff. So here is the final test. Look at your own financial life and tell me the truth. Are you building an engine, or are you decorating a cage? Are you feeding future output, or are you converting every raise into a more expensive dependency? Are you still judging progress by how exciting it feels, or have you grown up enough to judge it by how much private strength it is building beneath the surface? Because the next decade is going to pass whether you answer honestly or not. The machine does not care about your excuses. The thresholds do not move because you are busy. The arithmetic does not become kinder because your attention span got damaged by convenience. You will either spend the coming years constructing a system that can one day work harder than you do, or you will keep selling your life directly, month after month, and call that security because it is familiar. One path feels slow but becomes powerful. The other path feels normal but stays fragile. Choose carefully. The first path ends with an engine. The second ends with a paycheck and a prayer.